Hi, everybody. Welcome to SimiTree's webinar series. We're really excited you could join us. We're going to give everybody just a minute to get into the room and get their audio connected, but we're very glad you could join us today. In just a few minutes, I will put a link to the handout in the chat. If you have any questions as we get going, please feel free to use the Q&A. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Kim to talk about RCD success and how we can help you out in Oklahoma. Kim, take it away.
All right, great. Thank you, Missy. So today we're going to be talking about RCD. We're putting this together. We put this together specifically from Oklahoma, but after we kind of, put it out there, I realized that there may be folks from other states, other RCD states that may benefit. So while I may talk about Oklahoma a lot, I don't want anyone to feel left out. All right, so my name's Kim Wilkerson. I am the RCD manager here at SimiTree. Myself and my mighty little team, we've been involved with RCD throughout the country, as each state has rolled out since the very beginning. And so we currently have clients in every state that's in the RCD demonstration. So today we're going to be talking about, and I want to start with I know that the title and everything reflects back to RCD in general, but today we're going to be focusing specifically on PCR because I am sure, as with all the other states when they rolled out, the majority of folks chose the PCR option. It's the most popular by far. I think the last thing I saw was that upwards, like lower 90% of agencies across the country stay in PCR, even when they, are given another option. So we're going to focus on that today. So the first thing we're going to talk about are those top PCR non-affirm issues. We're going to go over some pitfalls. And then finally, some tips kind of from the pros. Some of them are some things that, necessarily Palmetto is not going to point out to you, but things that we have found after doing, tens of thousands of these over the past 5 years. One thing you're going to hear me talk about a lot is intake, to the point where you guys are probably going to be, is this an intake class or is this a class about pre-claim? It's both. Because I truly believe that intake is the foundation of pretty much everything that we do in home health in general, and PCR would not be an exception to that. Just like anything, when you're building it, the foundation is intake, and everything falls. If your intake process is clean and strong, everything else will fall in place. I trust me, after 35 years in home health, I can tell you that is the truth. It will set you up for success in your clinical, your billing, and finally now with PCR. So the top PCR non-affirmation issues, and a lot of these you're going to be like, well, yeah, but I want you to know that the vast majority of PCR non-affirm reasons truly are technical and or clerical errors. And when I say that, what are we talking about? We're going to go into more detail in a minute. Second of all, and probably the number one by far, would be your face-to-face deficiencies, documentation not supporting homebound criteria, and missing provider certification and recertification documentation. So the first section would be those technical and clerical errors. And when we talk about that, what we're talking about it could be as simple as missing a signature or a date on a plan of care. That could also be on your face-to-face, but it also could be them not being able to read it. Or perhaps you have, a physician that likes to use a stamp. And it's very obvious that is a stamp. As we all know, that is not allowed in the Medicare program for a signature. I think it's important to know that the biggest thing that we probably see when it comes to signatures is that when it comes to documentation that's coming from a facility, often those are not necessarily signed by the rendering provider, whether that's a nurse practitioner, whether that is a nurse practitioner or a PA. Um, and when I say it's not signed, I'm meaning that it's in a preliminary status when you guys get it. Sometimes the hospital is in such a rush, and SNFs as well are in such a rush to get the patient out the door. They'll send you the documentation when it's still in a preliminary status, and no one has really been charged with making sure that they get those signed documents. Also, if they cannot read the date or they cannot read the signature, they will often affirm. This time of year, we see lots of folks that haven't realized it's changed a year, and just out of habit, they're writing 2023. And it doesn't matter. I have people argue with me all the time, but look at the time, look at the date stamp on the fax confirmation. It's clear that it was 2024. It doesn't matter and doesn't matter at all. Next, when we're talking about missing or incomplete therapy goals, those being short, long-term, and or interventions, but this really goes beyond even therapy. One thing that we see a big issue with is there not being interventions when it comes to MSW and home health aid. While, sometimes people will say, well, isn't it obvious what the home health aid is going to be? Well, probably, yes, it should be obvious what the home health aid is going to do. But and it can be as simple as, home health aid to assist with ADLs, home health aid to assist with activities of daily living, with personal care, whatever it may be. But there needs to be absolutely those interventions. Going back really quickly to signatures, I just realized that something that we see a lot too is electronic signatures versus handwritten signatures. A lot of times you'll have physicians that they will, their note will be, they'll dictate their note and then they hand sign it. If that's the case, you need to make sure that they're dating that. Actually, it came to my head because I got an information this morning about that. Thirdly, talking about missing pages of the plan of care. Oftentimes we see this when EMRs use something similar to, a Procura or something similar where the documents are coming in automatically and getting scanned in and uploaded to the system. Your person who's doing your submissions just sees, oh, look, there's a signed plan of care. They take that, they upload it, but perhaps not all the pages are there. A very easy solution to that is including a clean copy of the missing page, but you just want to make sure that all the pages are there. And one question I get a lot is, well, does every page of the plan of care need to be signed? The answer is no, as long as that plan of care is paginated. Same thing when it comes to therapy evaluations and those type of things, any supplemental orders. As long as the document is paginated, you're only required to have that physician's or provider's signature on at least one of the pages of the document that's paginated. Finally, missing face-to-face attestations. And we're going to go over this, in quite a bit in a second, because face-to-face sufficiencies really are by far the number one. So we'll go ahead and move on to that. And if you had told me, as I said, I've been in home health a really long time ago. And if you had told me when home health, when CMS implemented the face-to-face requirement, if you told me that we would still be talking about face-to-face some almost 10 years later, I would probably laugh at you because, you think, oh, well, it's so simple, but it's really not. And not only is it not simple, a lot of times we are not in control of the documentation that is coming to us. We can't tell the doctor, oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Jones, the document that you sent us really is not going to work. I'm going to need you to add a few things to that. They typically are not horribly receptive to that. So the number one deficiency is face-to-face encounter not being related to the primary reason for home health services, meaning your primary diagnosis. While that may seem like, well, obviously, we're going to go over in a second some very specific things regarding that topic. A lot of times the face-to-face encounter will be missing or it will be untimely, Remember, you've got that 90 days prior to start of care and the 30 days after start of care to get that face-to-face. And finally, the date of the face-to-face is not documented by the certifying provider. And what we mean by that is there's no attestation, and like I said, we're going to go over that in more detail. So some tips about face-to-face. Please remember that the face-to-face, it has to actually be the clinical note from the encounter. It can't be a summary of what happened. One thing that we see a lot of are discharge summaries that come from facilities. And it talks about, the patient's been in the hospital for a month, and it goes, moment by moment, everything that happened to that patient while they were in the hospital. But what it doesn't include is an actual assessment, an actual encounter from that particular day. And so we're not able to accept that to submit to Palmetto. There's, like I said, those discharge summaries are generally a synopsis of the recent stay. So you're probably saying, well, but that's all the discharge planner sent me. Well, and we're going to go over some strategies to try and get that documentation. Once again, your encounter has to be 90 days prior or 30 days after. If you are doing it after, you need to make sure that that continues to still be a problem. I had a scenario last week. Patient got referred to home health from a sniff. Patient had a skin tear, a pretty significant skin tear. So that needed home health. They called the doctor. The doctor said, sure, yeah, go out, see the patient. Never saw the patient, was taking the ALF, the ALF's word for that there was a wound. Nursing goes out, starts seeing the patient, go into town. They set up an appointment for the PA or whoever to come in and see the patient. They see the patient 10 days after. But guess what? By that point, the wound was healed. So even though they could say patient had a wound 10 days ago at the start of care, it really doesn't work. And so just be really aware with that. And, it's one of those weird things, same thing with, say things like UTIs or pneumonia. It can't be a past tense. Further, it can't be a presumptive diagnosis. Patient goes to urgent care. Urgent care says, you know what, I think this patient has a UTI. Let's collect a UA. All over the face-to-face, it talks about that it's a presumptive UTI. The patient probably has a UTI. The agency admits the patient a few days later, and they admit the patient with the primary diagnosis of UTI. But if they don't have any kind of documentation to show that the patient was diagnosed with a UTI, then that face-to-face can't be used. Remember that the primary diagnosis should be addressed or treated in the encounter note. It cannot just be a list of diagnoses and, maybe it's got, 5 different diagnoses. And then at the end, the doctor says patient, complains of being very weak, refer to home health. You can't always draw, it's not up to the agency, nor is it up to vis-a-vis Palmetto to make that connection that, perhaps they're weak because of one of those diagnoses that are listed above as a medical history. You want to make sure that those are performed by the physician or an allowed non-physician provider, whether that's a nurse practitioner, a PA. They must document the date of the face-to-face encounter. And I'm going to give you some strategies for that in a second. The encounter does not need to say face-to-face. I get this all the time. It's a beautiful face-to-face encounter note, but the agency doesn't want to use it because it doesn't say face-to-face encounter at the top. Likewise, we'll have agencies that present us with what they are considering a face-to-face because it says face-to-face document at the top. But basically, it's something, and I see this a lot in some of the hospital EMRs. It basically says, yes, the patient had a face-to-face on X date, and this is what was wrong with them, and I'm referring them for home health, la la la. But it's not the actual encounter, and so that doesn't work. You want to make sure that it's signed and dated by the rendering provider. One big thing with that is you want to make sure that the rendering provider signs the note, that it's not just attested to by someone else. And finally, you've got that telehealth allowance. Just remember that's got to be audio and video, and it has to be documented as such. On your homebound criteria, you want to make sure that homebound criteria 1 and 2 are documented. It must have both components. I've read things that, it's the most beautiful dissertation about homebound I've ever read. But if it doesn't have these components, it doesn't matter. I recommend that you put this in a template if it's not already in your system, and do that verbatim, honestly, and then you won't go wrong. Missing certification and recertification programs, you're probably going, oh, well, I don't need to worry about that because, my EMR automatically sticks it on the plan of care. It does. However, if when that fax comes in and you upload it and you try to send it in, if even one word of that statement is not readable, they will kick it out. They will kick it out and they will non-affirm it simply because they cannot read one word, or it's blurry, or, whatever the case may be. One thing here that I want to go over really quickly is the certification statement. This statement here, the last on this slide, make sure that verbatim is on your plan of care. You'll see here it talks about that the patient had a face-to-face encounter on blah, 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 and that the encounter was related to the primary reason. I highly recommend that this is what you use for your attestation statement. People will write this beautiful thing that they made up. I don't know when, maybe when face-to-face first came out. It goes on and on and on. Patient was seen by Dr. Smith at this hospital for this reason during this hospitalization, and this happened and that happened. Who cares? No one cares. Honestly, nobody, much less Palmetto, to be honest with you, as far as it comes to PCR. All they are looking for is a date, and they're looking for the certifying physician to have signed the plan of care that has, or whatever document you want to use to attest it. You will screw yourself up every single time if you try to give too much information. If you try to give a dissertation about that it was Dr. Smith or PA under the direction of Dr. Jones at this facility on this date, and I'm going to tell you why. You never want to put the name of the provider who did the face-to-face on your attestation. Know why? Because if you decide that you need to change that face-to-face, and it does happen, it doesn't matter that it's even on the same day, but if you are so specific and you say the face-to-face was X date by X doctor, and you want to use a different face-to-face that's not that date by that doctor, you cannot use it, and you're going to have to get a brand new a brand new attestation. Okay, so that would be one of the super secret insider tips. All right, and trust me, Palmetto as RCD and pre-claim has evolved. Back when this first started, no, they did. They wanted a dissertation. They want to know what doctor, where, when, how, and everything else. Now they are just happy to get a date. I think they have realized that, there needs to be some flexibility there. The other big thing, laterality. I get this all the time. Patient has a wound to their right leg. As we've gotten more and more sophisticated with our coding and more specific, it's not just patient has a wound. It may be patient has a wound to the right buttock. Let's just use that as an example. But maybe it got either coded incorrectly or the physician put it incorrectly in their note. Not that they don't make mistakes, right? But they will not non-affirm it strictly for laterality. So if you say if your primary diagnosis is fracture of the right femur and your face-to-face says left femur, they're still going to affirm it. Okay. Now you say arm and it's really the leg. No, they're not going to affirm that. Supporting documentation. And when I'm talking about this, I am not talking about the OASIS. It kills me that people are still submitting the OASIS, whether it's the start of care OASIS, discharge OASIS, research, whatever, with on a routine basis. You don't need it. They don't want to look at it, and you're only setting yourself up for a heartbreak, if you want to be honest, because all you need is that nurse who did that lovely OASIS, but she wrote all over the OASIS. Oh, and the patient is so alert, and they go to church every week, 3 times a week actually, and they don't get tired or anything. They're so spry for their age. You're kind of not helping yourself there. Remember, PCR is not an ADR. Only send what you need to send. Okay. Don't send your OASIS. Don't send all these orders. Today someone called me and they said, oh, well, I'm submitting for my second billing period. And so, I need, do I need to wait for my PT eval that's in that, and for that billing period? No. First of all, you want to submit both periods at once. Why on God's green earth would you do something twice if you don't have to? Okay. So I get this question a lot. Oh, but my therapist, they only write their orders for 4 weeks because they know they're going to go in at re-eval. So what do I do? Because it doesn't cover the full 9 weeks. It doesn't cover both billing periods. Palmetto understands that more than likely that patient is going to be recertified. Is going to be re-evaled and going to be seen in that second 30 days. Okay. So you admit the patient, your plan of care says nursing for 3 weeks, and your therapist is say 2-week 4. You can go ahead and request nursing and therapy for both 30 days. They will affirm that all day long. The other thing we get a lot of question about is, okay, well, but I got affirmed, but now we added OT. So what do I do now? Because I can't bill without that UTIN that has OT. That is not true. Palmetto recognizes that the needs of the patient are going to change. And so if you add a discipline or change a discipline or discontinue a discipline, you don't need to do anything differently. Finally, some best practices in pre-claim. Like I said, getting it right from the very beginning. Get your face-to-face up front. It's like chalk. It's like fingernails on a chalkboard when I hear agencies say, oh, we're just going to go ahead and admit the patient and we'll worry about the face-to-face later. You know what? Later never comes. Okay? If for some god-awful reason you have to absolutely admit the patient and you don't have the face-to-face, and or it's maybe not the signed face-to-face, make sure that you put someone in charge of hunting that down, whether that's a lovely spreadsheet, because in home health we love spreadsheets, but someone needs to be in charge of ensuring that gets done. Because guess what happens? You admit the patient, you get your plan of care already, you send it out, it comes back. Oh, look, okay, now I'm going to submit for PCR. Oh, darn, my face-to-face never got signed. You have to stop. You have to send to the medical records, which takes forever once the chart has left the floor. And it's just a big mess. So do yourself a favor and make sure you get everything you can up front. On that comprehensive plan of care, you want to make sure you're covering home bowel status, medical necessity. And when I say by that, those interventions and goals should tie back to your primary diagnosis. Face-to-face attestation, you want to put those on your plan of care because it's one less piece of paper, A, that the doctor has to sign, and B, that you have to chase down for signature. If at all possible, you want to incorporate those therapy orders onto your plan of care. I know that that's not always feasible. Efficiency and timeliness for your documentation. If you tell your nurses, and it cracks me up, I'll be sitting in on orientation, and our policy here at XYZ Home Health is that everyone completes their documentation within 24 hours or 48 hours, or whatever the case may be. And I'll look around and everyone else will be like, meaning that's not true. Yeah, that's the rule, but nobody ever abides by that. I've had people tell me that. And I've heard people also say, what are they going to do? Fire me? Yes, yes, they are. They are going to fire you if you don't turn your paperwork in on time. Because the sooner you get that plan of care, get the documentation in, your plan of care created, out for signature, and get your OASIS submitted, the sooner you're going to be able to apply for your PCR, get your affirmation, and bill. So even though you may just have the sweetest little nurse, if she can't get her stuff in on time, she got to go. Same thing with your therapist. And I know that that's very easy for me to say, sitting here, behind a screen telling you as a consultant, but I had agencies for 30 years in home health. So when I say it can happen, it can happen. You just have to be firm and you have to be consistent. Finally, you need to make sure that you have the right person for the right job. There needs to be consistency in whoever is reviewing your plans of care. I have people ask me this all the time. Well, who should do my PCR? Does it need to be a nurse? I really don't want to waste a nurse on that. Can it just be a clerical person? I don't care who it is. But as long as the documentation is there and they know what they're doing and they can do it in a timely and efficient manner, you're fine. Productivity. This is another question I get all the time. Oh yeah, well, so I think I'm gonna move Susie into doing PCR, and then I think she should at least be able to do 50 of those a day. Don't you think? I mean, that's reasonable, isn't it? Or conversely, so I put Susie in there, and she says she can only do 5 a day. That's what she said, so I have to go by what she said. No, you're going to ask me for a number. I cannot give you that number because it's going to depend. It's going to depend on how good your charts look. If you have really good looking charts and your face to face is where it should be, and it's signed and it's pretty, and your plans of care are beautiful, they should be able to do a gosh darn lot of it. But if it's the other scenario, like I talked about, that the face to face wasn't signed, so there are days, and SimiTree, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, does outsourcing for pre-claim and ADRs. But for pre-claim, I may look at 50 charts in one day and not be able to submit maybe a handful. We make some adjustments and then we make improvements, and that productivity goes up. But it truly, and I hate when consultants give that answer. It just depends. But I promise you, in this instance, it really, really does. So one thing that we are offering to our Oklahoma agencies, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and offer this up to other states. Shh, don't tell my boss. Myself or one of my staff, if you are new to RCD, and or maybe you have a new person doing your RCD, or maybe you're struggling, maybe you cannot get your affirmation rate above that 90%, we will help you. We want you to be successful in this. The more successful you guys are, the more successful, as an industry, we show Palmetto that we are. So, and then vis-a-vis CMS. And then hopefully maybe one day we won't be having to do review choice demonstration, although I wouldn't bet on it. We've been doing this for years and years and years. We will do 5 complimentary reviews of episodes of care for you and give you some feedback. All that's going to be required is that, we get a business agreement, business associate agreement to cover all those HIPAA things. And we'll give back to you and say, you know what, I think your biggest problem is XYZ. Maybe it's your homebound status. Maybe, whoever is reviewing your plans of care perhaps isn't paying as close of attention perhaps as they should be. So finally, you can go to SimiTreeHC.com for any more questions. My email is listed there. If you ever have any questions, and I know people always say that, but I sincerely mean that. When I go down, especially I was just down in Oklahoma, when they announced that RCD was going to be extending there, and I have people, I just had someone call me this morning with a question, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Trust me, no question is dumb. And if you have that question, trust me, in all the submissions we've done, we've come across it. So thank you so much. I hope you took something away from this. And once again, please reach out to me if you have any questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kim. Thank you all for joining us today. Like Kim said, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. You have Kim's information there in your handout as well, so we're always available to help you. I hope you all have a wonderful Wednesday. Thank you again. Thanks,
Bye.
Kim.
Thank you.